It's a little bit unclear exactly how far Buddhism got in the early days westwards, but and there's been that's resulted in quite a lot of speculation, I think. But one point, it seems to be the case that the Emperor Ashoka, who lived around about 250 BC, and was the great king who converted to Dharma and more or less created the first Indian state, pan-Indian state. He became a very devoted lay follower of Buddhism, and he sent out missionaries, one might say, to different countries like Sri Lanka. But he also appears to have, and I'm using the word cautiously, of course, appears to have sent monks to, and possibly nuns, to Alexandria, of course, in Egypt, which is a city established by the great Alexander the Great. So it does seem that that is quite likely, knowing the reports about that really happened. But we have nothing much from the Greek side about that, of course. Then something more definite is that, this again brings up the character Alexander the Great. Alexander's armies had, as people generally know, gone very far to the east in their conquest adventures, whatever one wants to call them. They certainly crossed the Hindu Kush and gone into part of the Indian subcontinent. And in that area, actually probably before they even reached India, they encountered Dharma, because Buddha Dharma had spread by that time to the northwest of India. And they're in fact Buddhist kingdoms. So there's no account of Alexander meeting Buddhism, but after Alexander's retreat from that area, hybrid Greek-Indian kingdoms were established in the northwest of India, probably like round about the area Afghanistan, north of Afghanistan, Bactria, and so on and so forth. So there was a Greek-Indian culture that lasted there for 200 or 300 years. And we know for certain that Buddhism was a very big influence there. One reason we know that, so this is the encounter of Buddhism with Greek culture, elements of it. One reason we know that is that the very first Buddha images, statues and reliefs were made in that culture, in that cultural setting. Because it seems that in the earliest days of Buddhism, there was not a tradition of portraying the Buddha, not out of any reverence for a deity, but simply that it was felt, non-self. How do you therefore depict the Buddha? Best to depict him as a kind of absence on any reliefs that describe events from his life. But under the influence of Greek sculptural norms, Buddha statues start to appear. And what is even more interesting is that Buddha appears in the kind of guise of a typical Greek philosopher. His hair is Greek in kind of curly style, and he's wearing, not rather than monastic robes, he's wearing something that looks suspiciously like a Greek toga. So the first Buddha images are definitely reflecting that Greek influence. And again, then you have when his disciple Vajrapani is depicted, he appears to is a lightly disguised version of Heracles. But even more than that, in fact, there's a very important Buddhist scripture, not a sutra, not a composition, not a teaching directly from the Buddha, but notice an important philosophical text is composed in that hybrid Greek Buddhist culture. There is one of the kings, the Greek kings, a Greek or Indian king, was Menandros, King Menandros, in that northwestern area. And he, with his name lightly Sanskritized as Milinda, he became a disciple of the monk Nagasena, the great monk Nagasena, who's reputed to be one of the 16 Arahats, but whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. Anyway, Nagasena was certainly a very great philosophical master, And the dialogue that Milinda had with Nagasena, in which Nagasena presents all the fundamental Buddhist teachings, non-self, karma, dependent origination, rebirth, and so on, was collected and preserved as a very important philosophical text. And the questions that Menandros, aka Melinda, is asking are very typical of somebody who's been brought up in a Greek philosophical, with a Greek philosophical background. And the rapport between the two and the ease of kind of communication and the kind of congruence between the questions and the Buddhist answers is very striking. Meaning, in a way, there's obviously a way we can see that Buddhist thought and Greek thought could have a rapport, could have a connection. Well, then of course those Greek Indian kingdoms disappear, and there's not, apart from the fact that the name Iskander is a very popular name in northwestern India, particularly Pakistan, among people who have otherwise long forgotten about the existence of Alexander. There's not much evidence of them remains, apart from the archaeological remains like the Buddha images, which I talked about. So that is really it. You see, because after that, Buddhism doesn't penetrate further west than Iran, than Persia. It does get that far. We know that because in the first of all, we know it flourishes north of Iran in nowadays Tajikistan, but also in Iran itself. There's in the 3rd, 4th century AD, there's this syncretistic movement called Manichaeanism, founded by a Persian religious teacher or Iranian religious teacher called Mani. And Mani is one of those kind of interesting curios from history, in that he tried to blend together Christianity, which of course had come from the east, from the west of Iran, with the native Zoroastrianism, i.e. native Zoroastrianism, native to Iran, and Buddhism. So Manichaeism is just like a kind of syncretistic religion, but it definitely has Buddhist elements. There's no doubt about it. Rebirth and other things are present in the Manichaean system from Buddhism. But of course, Mani comes to an unfortunate end. He's crucified by the Zoroastrian priests in Iran, though his religion then spreads westwards and comes into into the European world. Saint Augustine was a Manichae for a time, and then there's certain types of Gnosticism in the West, right down to the Cathars, products of Manichaeanism. So you could, if you like, tease out a kind of connection between elements of Buddhism and these Western spiritual heretical systems, right down to the Cathars, as I said. Now, apart from that, it gets very sketchy. One thing is maybe interesting to mention is that if we discount direct influence from Buddhism on European thought, and I'll come back to that perhaps, but there could be resonances. The late and great German Buddhist academic Edward Conze, a very colourful, interesting man, specialist in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and former Marxist who gloriously converted to the Dharma in 1930-something. He used to argue that there were uncanny resonances between elements of Buddhist thought, particularly Mahayana, particularly Perfection of Wisdom, and elements in Greek, in pre-Christian Greek thought. But he didn't want to say it's a direct influence, one way or the other, but just resonances. And that may therefore account also for resonances between Gnosticism in European religion around the time of the birth of Christianity, the Gnostic systems, and Buddhism. The great Italian Buddhologist, Professor Tucci, used to argue for that, for instance. But again, whether that's just resonance or whether there's influence is another matter. More recently, some people have tried to argue that the Greek philosopher Pyrrho who is usually credited in the history of philosophy book, says the founder of a school of skepticism in 3rd century BC Athens had actually met Buddhism as a soldier in Alexander the Great's army, because when he came back to Greece, he was certainly teaching some system in which his followers could attain a state of equanimity, of being untroubled by their disturbing emotions. It's hard to know much more about his system than that, but some people, it's been kind of quite fashionable recently to argue that Pyrrho was in fact a Greek Buddhist. I can't say, I'm not a specialist in European philosophical history. So whether any more connections will emerge, who knows? But anyway, the final and the tragic thing is really that Buddhism was not able to spread further west than Iran because of the coming, for many reasons, not least the coming of an implacable theistic religion, which occupied most of the Middle East up to India, and finally resulted in the more or less total extinction of Buddhism in India itself. I leave on that grave note.